Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are shortcutting you straight into one of the most fundamental, ancient, and yet scientifically really cutting-edge subjects, this universal human thing of religious devotion.
It's a huge topic, yeah. We're drawing on research from, well, neurobiology, sociology, psychology.
Got the mix.
Definitely. And our goal really is to pull out the key nuggets for you,
Yeah.
to show why belief isn't maybe just a choice, but something that seems almost hardwired into us humans and, how that wiring affects our health, both mental and physical.
And that starting point is so crucial, isn't it? That belief is, well, universal. Researchers keep finding that pretty much all human communities we know of, big civilizations or tiny isolated groups, they show these strong religious tendencies.
Right. It's not about finding one specific dogma everywhere, but more like a consistent tendency across the species to believe in something divine or supreme. I mean, look, globally, something like 3/4 of the world population follows some kind of religion.
Okay, so if it's that universal, you have to ask, right?
Yeah.
Is there some kind of innate readiness? Are we sort of built to look for a creator?
That's exactly the question. And researchers, even if they argue about the specifics of beliefs, they do tend to agree on this idea of a built-in need to believe, an innate religious disposition.
Like the concept of fitrot in some traditions.
Precisely, yeah. The idea that humans are kind of created with this core programming that leans them towards recognizing and seeking a creator, it's seen as just fundamental to human nature, this inherent spiritual need.
That makes a lot of sense. So if it's programmed in, let's unpack this. Can we actually find evidence of it, like inside the body? Now we're getting into the really new, kind of surprising research, the biology of faith.
Right, we're talking neurobiology here. This field gives us that critical link, showing how our behaviors, our emotions, even our beliefs, they correspond directly to what's happening biologically in the brain and nervous system. Every thought, every feeling ultimately has a physical side to it.
And this meeting of minds, so to speak, gave birth to this whole new field, neurotheology, which can be a bit controversial.
It can be, yeah. It uses modern brain imaging, fMRIs, PT scans, to actually study the biological basis of religious or mystical experiences while they're happening.
So it's like looking under the hood, seeing which parts of the brain light up when someone's trying to connect with the divine.
Kind of, yeah. And the early studies were, well, groundbreaking. Back in the 90s, you had researchers like Persinger and Ramachandran looking into what got called the God spot. Bit of a loaded term, maybe?
I remember that. In the temporal lobes, wasn't it?
Exactly, the neural connections there. And using brain scans, they consistently saw activity in that temporal lobe area when people talked about spiritual or religious things.
So like when Western subjects discussed God?
Or when Buddhists looked at religious symbols that were deeply meaningful to them. It suggested a specific brain pathway for processing these kinds of concepts, divinity, sacredness.
That's fascinating. But it also suggests other brain parts must be involved in the feeling of it all, right? That sense of transcendence.
Oh, absolutely. The parietal lobe, for instance. That's the bit responsible for our sense of time and space.
Okay.
Well, it's strongly linked to mystical experiences. When people report feeling, one with the universe or like they've lost track of time and space, that region shows clear changes in activity.
So the feeling of unity might be the brain kind of blurring the lines between self and other.
That's one interpretation, yeah. Like the brain's normal job of separating you from the world gets temporarily dialed down.
And then came the even bigger claim, maybe the God gene. Dean Hammer, wasn't it? Back in 2004.
That's the one. He claimed to have found a gene linked not so much to traditional religious practice like going to church,
Right.
but more to an individual's level of what he called self-transcendence.
Self-transcendence. What exactly does that mean here?
It's that feeling of being integrated with a larger whole, something sacred. Hamer argued that because spirituality is so universal, it probably had a genetic component. He even suggested a better name might be the God-seeking gene.
Okay, so we've got potential brain spots, maybe even genes. If we can map the pathways, trace the genetics, what's the big scientific but we have to remember here?
The caveat. It's absolutely crucial. These findings are still relatively new, and importantly, we cannot say definitively that these brain changes cause the spiritual experience.
Right.
Nor can we say the brain itself creates God.
So seeing more activity in the temporal lobe during prayer doesn't prove or disprove God's existence. It shows the experience of connecting is, well, real to the brain.
Precisely. The link between those brain circuits and the ultimate reality of God, that remains, at the end of the day, a matter of faith. Science is just mapping the internal machinery,
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Let's shift from the hardware, the brain and genes, to the software maybe, the deep psychological drives that seem to use that wiring, starting with the search for meaning.
Yeah, the existential search for meaning. It seems to be a core human drive, a fundamental fact of our existence. We ask these huge questions. Why are we here? Why do we suffer? What happens when we die?
It makes me think of Viktor Frankl, logotherapy, right? He argued that the biggest problem for modern people is this frustration of the will to meaning.
Exactly. He believed our deepest need isn't really pleasure or power, but purpose, finding meaning in life.
And religion often steps right into that gap.
It really does. Research consistently shows 80, maybe 90% of people see finding meaning as absolutely fundamental. And, science and the secular ideologies, they often struggle to give satisfying answers to those big why questions, especially about suffering.
So religion offers a whole package deal.
You could say that. G.W. Allport called it a comprehensive meaning system. It provides clarity about life's uncertainties, which can relieve a huge amount of mental tension.
Okay, next big drive. Maybe the biggest. The fear of death and that deep desire for immortality.
Oh, undoubtedly. Death is pretty much universally the biggest fear, and wanting to live on somehow seems one of our strongest innate desires. Religion tackles this head on.
Yeah, it promises eternal life, often paradise, free from pain and fear. It reframes death not as an end, but as like a bridge to something else.
Right, and often it promises cosmic justice, too, compensation for the unfairness we see in this life.
But there's tension here in how thinkers interpret this, isn't there? Like Freud versus Jung.
Big time. Freud basically saw belief in an afterlife as wish fulfillment, an imaginary comfort blanket we create because reality, especially death, is too harsh, pure escapism for him.
But Jung saw it differently.
Completely. Jung viewed that desire for an afterlife, or for transcendence, not as escapism, but as an essential, unavoidable part of being human. For him, the idea of an afterlife, whether literally true or not, was psychologically necessary, an archetype we have to grapple with.
Wow, yeah. Two very different takes on the same core drive.
Absolutely. It shows how deep these questions run.
Okay, third psychological source. Dealing with helplessness. That feeling when you just can't achieve something, you hit a wall.
Yeah, frustration, it creates tension, feelings of powerlessness. And religious belief can act as a really powerful buffer against challenges that feel totally beyond our control.
Like natural disasters. Or serious illness. Or even losing your job, feeling isolated.
Exactly. When faced with problems that seem insurmountable, it's almost natural to look for a rescuer, a source of power greater than ourselves.
But this raises a key question about faith, doesn't it? If you turn to religion, mainly because you feel helpless during a crisis, does that faith stick around when things get better?
That's a really important point, and the answer is not always. This kind of helplessness-driven religiosity, while incredibly strong in the moment, isn't guaranteed to last.
So people might drift away when life gets back to normal.
We see that happen, yeah. Or sometimes the opposite, if people feel God didn't help them in their crisis, they might actually turn against their faith, feel abandoned, become rebellious even. So it's powerful, but can be fragile.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to our cognitive side.
Mm-hmm.
The mind really doesn't like ambiguity, does it? We crave certainty, cognitive satisfaction.
That seems hardwired too, and because our own cognitive abilities are limited, especially when facing huge unknowns, the mind often looks for external sources to explain things.
And this is where religion maybe has an edge over science.
In certain areas, yes. Religion offers definitive answers to those profound metaphysical questions that science, just by its nature, can't really address.
Like, how did everything begin? What's the ultimate purpose of life? What is consciousness? Why is there suffering? Science tells us how, maybe, but religion offers a why.
Precisely. And this search for certainty helps explain why, for example, adolescents often explore religion. It gives them coherent answers about purpose and identity right when they're navigating huge life changes.
Makes sense. And finally, let's look at the social angle. Starting with social learning, how we learn by watching and imitating others.
Yeah, basic psychology. We learn behavior through imitation, observation, and eventually internalizing things.
And parents are obviously huge here, especially early on.
Overwhelmingly the biggest influence in early childhood, religious behaviors like praying or going to services get reinforced by parental approval, maybe little rewards.
But that shifts in adolescence, right?
Yeah.
Peers become more important.
They definitely do. Peers become the strongest models then. Teenagers often look for religious role models they trust to help them figure out who they are.
And culture itself is a massive shaper. Religion often provides the scaffolding for a culture's values, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It organizes culture, provides this robust value system.
Yeah.
Developing character often involves internalizing those religious values passed down through the community.
Which brings us to our last factor here, guilt and the religious concept of sinfulness.
Right. Let's make that distinction. There's normal human guilt when we feel we've done wrong.
Okay.
And then there's sinfulness, which is kind of the religious version, judged against a divine standard by a divine court, so to speak.
So religion sets the standard.
It does. Religious rules create that sense of accountability, maybe falling short. But here's the clever part. The religion also provides the way out. It offers atonement, forgiveness, relief for that troubled conscience.
Ah, so it creates the tension, but also offers the release. A two-way street.
Exactly. It's a really powerful motivational loop. We see this really clearly in studies about religious conversion. People who convert often report these intense prior feelings of guilt,
Right?
which are then specifically and powerfully relieved when they embrace the new faith and its promise of forgiveness or atonement.
Okay, wow. So we've covered a lot of ground biology, psychology, social factors. What does it all add up to? Let's look at the actual measurable effects of having religious faith. And I guess we need to start by stressing that the kind of faith matters hugely.
Oh, absolutely critical. This is the hinge.
Yeah.
The positive effects we're about to talk about are strongly linked to what researchers call intrinsic religiosity,
Meaning?
meaning a genuine, sincere devotion. Doing it for God's sake because you truly believe it. That's opposed to extrinsic religiosity, which is more about using religion as a means to an end for social status, business context, fitting in, personal gain.
Gotcha. So assuming the faith is intrinsic, what are the psychological benefits?
They're pretty profound, actually. Study after study shows a positive link with better mental health overall. So lower anxiety, lower rates of depression, and significantly higher self-esteem.
The depression link is particularly strong, isn't it?
It's quite stark. Higher intrinsic religiosity correlates with lower depression rates. People who worship regularly have about half the rate of depression compared to those who don't attend services.
Wow, half the rate.
And the suicide stats are even more dramatic. Non-attenders have suicide rates about 4 times higher than regular attenders.
That's significant. It really suggests faith acts as a kind of psychological buffer or safety net, especially in tough times.
It really seems to. It serves as that source of meaning finding during crises that we talked about. It also encourages something called collaborative coping.
Collaborative coping.
Yeah, it's where the believer still works hard to solve their problems, but they see God as like an active partner, a helper who's sharing the load with them. It reduces the sense of being alone with the burden.
Let's touch on the social side briefly, too. You mentioned lower crime rates among the religious. Is that just the belief system? Or is it maybe that people drawn to organized religion are less likely to offend anyway?
It's probably a mix of both, realistically. But the religious motivation itself is powerful. Belief provides this strong metaphysical reason for behaving morally. Justice, compassion, honesty, because there's a sense of accountability beyond just human laws.
So it acts as a kind of social control, reaching into the conscience where laws can't.
Well put, yes. And interestingly, on the topic of prejudice, research generally finds that intrinsically religious people tend to be the least prejudiced.
Really? That might surprise some people.
It might, but it suggests a genuine internalizing of the core teachings, which in most major religions emphasize acceptance, love, respect for others, rather than using faith to exclude people.
Okay, and finally, the benefits aren't just in the mind or society. They seem to be physical, too. Physiological.
Yes, this is also really striking. Research indicates that higher religiosity correlates with longer lifespans. One major study found religious individuals lived, on average, 29% longer than their less religious peers.
29%? That's huge. How does that even work?
Well, we see better health markers generally. Lower rates of heart problems, lower diastolic blood pressure, better ability to cope with chronic illnesses. Part of it is likely protective behaviors.
Like religious rules against certain things?
Exactly. Many religions have prohibitions against things like heavy drinking, smoking, substance abuse. So even if someone avoids those things primarily out of religious duty, not specifically for health reasons, the practical outcome is better physical health over the long term.
Fascinating. So wrapping up, we've seen this biological wiring that seems to predispose us to belief, these deep psychological needs for meaning, security, certainty that use that wiring, and then these observable benefits, mental, physical, social, that often come with a life shaped by intrinsic faith.
That's a good summary, yeah. It seems these systematic religions, they really do address the full spectrum of what it means to be human, the biological, the psychological, the social. They fill that innate need, that Futrot we mentioned right at the start.
And we also touched on how that deep need for belief doesn't always manifest traditionally. It can come out in non-religious ways, or even sometimes as rebellion, if those needs feel unmet or crushed.
Which leads us to maybe a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If science, like neurotheology, keeps getting better at mapping the brain circuits involved in mystical experiences, if we can explain exactly how the brain processes the divine,
Yeah.
will understanding the mechanism diminish that profound human need to seek the divine, or will it just shift the mystery? Maybe the question won't be how it works in the brain, but why it works that way, what the ultimate meaning is.
Hmm. Does knowing how the plumbing works make you less thirsty?
That's a great way to put it. Something to think about. We'll leave you with that question.